Last month, we finally got Game Boy through Game Boy Advance games online for Nintendo Switch, and in my last video I talked about some safe pick Game Boy Advance games that will almost certainly be brought to Nintendo Switch online in the near future. Currently, we have a few online launch games available, with Metroid Fusion just being added to the library, and we know of at least 4 other games that will be available sooner than later per the Nintendo Direct. With a back catalog of hundreds of games that were released for the Game Boy Advance, it's fun to speculate what else we could eventually see announced for the NSO. In this video, I wanted to talk about 10 more fan-favorite GBA games that have a pretty decent shot at becoming available and why. I've mixed in some suggestions mentioned by the Game Boy Advance community as well as some of my personal favorites. Before I jump in, I also want to address a few obvious games. I'm leaving Pokemon off of this list since I am a believer that the Pokemon Company has their own plans for their Game Boy games that would involve Pokemon Home. Also, Castlevania, Advance Wars, Mega Man Zero, and Mega Man Battle Network did not make this list as they're either playable on Switch already or they are coming soon. I'm also not including any ports like Super Mario World or A Link to the Past since most of the originals are already available in the Super Nintendo Online library. So without further ado, here are 10 GBA games we hope to see on NSO, starting with some Sega classics. Kicking things off with one of the most demanded Game Boy Advance games is Sonic Advance. It may seem normal now, but at the time it was pretty surreal for Sonic to finally appear on a Nintendo console, but it finally happened on the GBA in 2001. Instead of trying to break the traditional formula of Sonic games, Sega just leaned into it more, but instead just catering them to the handheld platform. From the get-go, you can play as Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, and Amy Rose, who all bring a unique playstyle to the gameplay, providing a different experience from one to the next. Speed your way through 12 stages collecting coins as usual, taking on series regular villain Dr. Eggman, or Robotnik as you may remember him. I love the toony art style in this game as well as the terrific level design and backgrounds. There's great replay value as well, with hidden rings scattered throughout the game that can lead to some unlockable endgame content. There's also even some mini-games along the way too. The game also features multiplayer with 1 or more cartridges and link cable play so you can connect with friends and compete against each other. With the Switch's online multiplayer functionality, this could be a real treat for Sonic fans. For some reason, this game was never added to the North American Wii U Virtual Console and was never re-released outside of the GBA. And with the recent success of Sonic Frontiers and the countless other Sonic games available on the Switch, the chances of Sonic Advance making its way to the NSO are pretty strong in my opinion. And it should go without saying, this includes both sequels too. Next up is one of my favorite Game Boy Advance games, Gunstar Superheroes. I made a video on this last fall. If you haven't yet checked it out, definitely do so. Developed by Studio Treasure, this game is considered a sequel to Sega Genesis Gunstar Heroes, but a lot of fans view it as a remake of sorts. Designed pretty faithfully to its predecessor, this one takes a bit of an anime influence, but the action is where it's at. Arguably one of the best looking GBA games, it captures the pure essence of run and gun chaos in such a great way. The biggest downside here is there is no co-op, so unfortunately you'll have to enjoy this one solo, but there is still lots of fun to be had. You can still choose between 2 characters, and there are still multiple ammo types, although not as many as in Gunstar Heroes, and gone is the combination mechanic, which is also a little disappointing as well. The original game was shown a lot of Nintendo love recently, being given a 3D port on the 3DS, as well as appearing on the Sega Genesis NSO app, and also even being included in Sega Genesis Classics, which is available on Switch too. But Gunstar Superheroes has yet to be re-released anywhere, so I think now is finally the time. Before Gunstar Superheroes, Studio Treasure created a game based on the popular Japanese character Astro Boy. Akin to a game like Mega Man, you'll tear through side-scrolling beat-em-up action using your various abilities and superpowers, which includes physical combat, dash attacks, and laser beams, all of which will need to be utilized to survive through the game's 7 overall levels. There's also a light RPG element here. As you progress, Astro Boy will earn points to be used for leveling up his different stats by meeting different characters. Since its debut in 2004, there has yet to be any official re-release of Omega Factor, and it was not offered in the Wii U Virtual Console. I will go ahead and make the Gunstar Heroes argument here as well. Since that game has been very accessible lately, maybe Treasure and Nintendo can collaborate to give us Astro Boy Omega Factor via Switch Online. We're not done with Treasure just yet. One more game from the studio on this list is Advanced Guardian Heroes. Sega Saturn owners may recall this franchise from the 90s game Guardian Heroes. In 2004, Nintendo brought the sequel Advanced Guardian Heroes to the Game Boy Advance. Maintaining the same beat-em-up style of gameplay, the graphics and art style did get a bit of a lift from its predecessor. As you might now expect from the last two games I talked about, this game is loaded with explosive action as well. You can pick from one of 3 initial playable characters, and you're equipped with several fighting moves as well as elemental magic to help take out enemies and bosses. While the game does suffer a bit from stuttering due to the intense graphics and animation, there's still a lot of fun to be had, and the highlight here is definitely the co-op. I'm not sure how many friendship duos had cartridges back in 2004 and could easily link up to experience this game, but if we got this on NSO, it would be a game changer. Add this to the list of games never to have been re-released or offered via Virtual Console. You're probably thinking, why not Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 instead? That wouldn't be a wrong answer in the slightest, but we did get Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 and 2 remake recently, and that game plays great on Switch. So I wanted to go a different route and pick Tony Hawk's Underground, which was the first of several Tony Hawk spin-off game titles. While at its core it still looks and plays like a Tony Hawk game, there's now a bit more depth with the career mode that involves exploring stages where NPCs can give you tasks that reward you points and help you to unlock new tricks and new areas. So essentially it's like a Tony Hawk RPG. The classic arcade mode is still there too, filled with the usual skateboarding challenges. The game features 10 different parks and over a dozen skaters to play as and unlock. There are even some small updates like custom gear and decks. You can compete against a friend too with multiplayer via GameLink cable. There are countless hours you can sink into this if you want to try to unlock every single bonus, if that's your kind of thing. As I mentioned, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 and 2 remake did release on Switch, so that does give me hope that Nintendo can work out a deal to secure this and its sequel for NSO. Now you might be thinking, SpiderMan and gaming pretty much only go together on PlayStation. And yeah, that is mostly true these days, but Nintendo was able to steal Spider-Man back in 2019 for the Switch exclusive Marvel Ultimate Alliance 3, which is one of my favorite Switch games ever. And seeing as how Mysterio's Menace is exclusive to the GBA, I feel a little optimistic we could see this game resurface via NSO. For those who haven't played it, it's an action platformer made by Vicarious Visions, the same studio that developed the Tony Hawk game, so there is a similar look to this one. What Mysterio's Menace has to offer is an action-packed brawler with plenty of familiar Spider-Man villains and several locations around New York City you'll be visiting. And what's even cooler is that it's not totally linear. You can pick from one of 3 locations to start the game. And each stage offers up some exploration too. There are a handful of upgrade items to look for and even power-ups which can activate different Spider-Man suits. So you can play this game more than once and enjoy a different experience each time. It's also not too long. You can finish it in less than 2 hours without much trouble, and there's also a hard mode if you're into that challenge. Back in 2003, there were multiple GBA games released by legendary studio Konami. One of them was Ninja 5-0. As the title implies, you play the role of a ninja cop, but your objective is to stop a terrorist organization that has taken over called the Mad Masks. Armed with unlimited throwing stars and a sword, you can hustle your way across 20 levels, doing damage from a distance or cutting down bad guys from close range. Similar to Spider-Man Mysterio's Menace, there is exploration required, and it's not just getting from point A to point B. There are keys you have to locate in different rooms that will ultimately lead you to an exit. Instead of web swinging, you're equipped with a grappling hook that allows you to reach the higher platforms, which you will need to reveal more doors. With power-ups stashed throughout each stage, you can upgrade your throwing stars and do even more damage. When you manage to fill up your special meter, you can unleash a screen-wide special attack that might even come in handy in boss fights. A used cartridge of Ninja 5-0 is extremely expensive these days, as the game was not a high seller, and it was never re-released despite Konami being known to offer a lot of their games in collections, so let's hope they finally let this game see the light of day again. One of my deeper cut picks for this list is Sword of Mana. A prequel to the SNES classic Secret of Mana, Sword of Mana serves as a remake to the original game in the Mana series called Final Fantasy Adventure. It was a Game Boy game from 1991 that was created as a spin-off from Final Fantasy, but then it grew into its own IP. Sword of Mana does a good job at taking advantage of the GBA hardware and graphics to really give the original a more stunning makeover. This time you can pick between the role of boy or girl protagonist with a few slight variations in storylines depending on which one you choose. Unfortunately, there is no true co-op here, which is disappointing when you recall that Secret of Mana had not 2, but 3-player co-op. As a top-down action-adventure game, Sword of Mana does well to offer as another Zelda-like experience, and it even includes several RPG mechanics. You can level up into various character classes as you defeat enemies in the overworld, collect upwards of 10 different weapons, and even upgrade those weapons with ingredients by visiting the blacksmith. It also features a handful of impressive-looking locales, complete with a day and night cycle that helps to enhance the visuals. Surprisingly, this game was not included in the Collection of Mana compilation from a few years ago, and it did not appear on the Virtual Console. With numerous titles from Studio Square Enix being available on Switch, I think it would be nice to see Sword of Mana finally make another modern-day appearance. Presented in the isometric viewpoint, Final Fantasy Tactics Advance was the first Final Fantasy game to make a return to a Nintendo platform for quite some time back in 2003. It's not a typical Final Fantasy RPG as the title may indicate. Instead, we got a strategy-focused Final Fantasy game with all original characters and story. Reminiscent of something like Advance Wars or Fire Emblem, the gameplay is turn-based where your team will engage or battle against the AIs, taking turns trying to defeat one another until the battle is finished. Your characters gain XP just for participating and you level them up as you go. There's a wide variety of characters with different classes you can pick from, as well as armor and weapons. The layers that can be found here far exceed any other game on this list, and you can sink dozens of hours into this game by doing things like completing missions and unlocking new areas. A second player can even join in with a link cable. There's just so much content that this game is worthy of its own video, honestly. Of all the games on this list, this is the only one we got here via the Wii U Virtual Console. And seeing as how there is a big Final Fantasy presence on Switch, I think this is one of the ones more likely to be relocated from that to Switch Online. Last but not least is another home run pick from Konami. Boktai, The Sun is in Your Hand. Way before the days of Pokemon Go and Pikmin Bloom, video game design icon Hideo Kojima came up with this idea to embed a solar sensor on a Game Boy Advance cartridge. By spending some time outside during the day with your GBA, you could utilize the sun to apply itself as a mechanic in this game. You play as a vampire hunter named Django, and your goal is to eradicate undead creatures called Immortals. Another game with an isometric point of view, a lot of the focus also involves stealth. With your solar-generated cartridge, you refill the ammo of your solar gun to use against these creatures as you explore different indoor and outdoor areas. Luckily, it's not completely unplayable without sunlight, as there are in-game solar chargers you can find to replenish your ammo. My wishful thought here is that maybe Nintendo can use the sensor available on the Switch to integrate into the game to give it an authentic experience. You know, the one that controls the auto brightness feature. I'm not sure if it's used for anything otherwise, but this would be incredible and also give Boktai the opportunity to gain a lot more notoriety than it did during the GBA's heyday. So there it is, 10 GBA games that we want to no, wait a second. Something's off. Oh, I know. I know I said 10 games, but how could I forget Mother 3? At this point, I don't think much really needs to be said about this game. I'm sure a lot of you have played the unofficial English fan translation, and I hear it's terrific. But there's still a lot of fans that have been patiently waiting for Nintendo to release the official English version that allegedly does exist. So what better time to release it than on one of Nintendo's biggest install bases ever with the Switch? Last year, Earthbound finally came to the Super Nintendo Online Library after being only available on the 3DS and Wii U eShop. Now with an online Game Boy Advance library, we may really have a chance to see Mother 3 officially drop here for the first time ever. So that wraps it up. 10 games plus one bonus game that we would like to see come to Game Boy Advance NSO. Let me know if you're a fan of any of these, and also drop some other underrated GBA gems in the comments. After this, I'll be focusing on my next game episode, so be on the lookout for that soon. Thanks for watching.